How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is What If Deku was the son of Nezu, the movie. Sit back, relax, and enjoy, and now, let's begin. To start this what if off, we see Izuku swinging his legs back and forth, sitting down on a chair. As we zoom out, we see that he is inside of a doctor's office, more specifically a quirk doctor's office, as the young Izuku is 4 years old exactly as of that day. As he would be swinging his legs back and forth, he would look over towards his dad, Nezu, who was sitting right down next to him. "Dad, what do you think my quirk's going to be?" he would ask excitedly, still jittering around, just violently shaking in his seat as he just couldn't wait. Nezu would put his paw up to his chin before thinking for a moment. "I don't know, Izuku. That's quite the question," Nezu would say. A little more backstory on Izuku is that he is the son of Nezu, and that his mother is just out of the picture. She is absent, and presumably might have died in some sort of villain attack. However, Izuku and Nezu don't know for sure. At least, Izuku doesn't. Nezu knows Izuku's way too young to just tell him what happened to his mother. The quirk doctor would walk out to see the two sitting down, as he would then motion for them to stand up, signaling them for him to come with him. "Izuku and Nezu, please come with me," he would say, as they would then walk to a doctor's office or a private room, where they would then sit down as the doctor would take a couple of tests, x-rays, before he would end up sitting down with Izuku, looking over his just clipboard with all of just the information. "Great news, Izuku. It appears you will have a quirk, and quite the fairly strong one at that. I can't say for sure what your quirk's going to be, but I know it's going to be something good," you would say, smiling at Izuku, as Izuku would jump up in the air with his All Might action figure in hand, pumping it up. "Yeah! I can't wait to be a hero!" he would say, as the doctor would only just laugh. "Good luck on that, Izuku." The doctor would then look over towards Nezu with a cold just look before handing him some paperwork. "Here's your paperwork, Nezu. Just telling what Izuku's quirk could possibly be and just what we think it would be. Or you can also tell us what it's going to be, so when we have to write it down on his quirk sheet," the doctor would say. Nezu would nod as they would then end up leaving. We now see Izuku sitting in the UA building, as it was just in the middle of a school day. As Izuku would be sitting there swinging around in one of the office chairs, Nezu would try to calm Izuku down. However, Izuku would say that he couldn't calm down. "He's going to get his quirk today. If not today, it's going to be tomorrow," he would say with an excited grin on his face, as Nezu would only just laugh at him. "Yeah, hopefully your quirk's quite the strong one, you know," as Izuku would nod his head. Nezu would end up asking one of the teachers who didn't have any classes that day to come take Izuku and just to go around playing with him, possibly just throw some type of ball around, just to get all of the energy out of the young Izuku. The teacher would walk in before nodding their head, as they would then take Izuku out, where Izuku would end up just looking around at all of the wildlife around him, as he would end up just pointing at a small stray cat that was hiding behind of a tree. Izuku would say that the cat looked cool, and just without thinking, Izuku would suddenly transform into a cat right before the eyes of the teacher. The teacher would look on just in amazement as Izuku would end up looking down at his body with his paws now in front of him. So he would say, I'm a cat now?" He would say, questioning himself, as the teacher would look down at him, hearing that the cat started to meow, as Izuku now unlocked one of his quirks. Yes, you heard that right, he had 2 quirks, one of them being an animal quirk, allowing for him to turn into any animal, and the drawback is he just couldn't communicate with the rest of the people, as it's just in his own just language. Say if he was a cat, he'd be meowing, when to himself he'd think he was actually talking. So so he really just couldn't communicate to anyone when he was transformed unless he was talking to some sort of animal or giving off some sort of noise to that animal. So with Izuku there, he would suddenly transform back before hopping around, yelling excitedly that he unlocked his quirk, that had finally awakened. Izuku would end up thinking of another animal that he had saw just in the books that he had been reading, as it was a great hawk, as he would end up turning into this hawk before flying around, before landing back onto the ground, turning back to normal. He would pump his fist up into the air, yelling that so excited that his quirk's awesome. The teacher would quickly grab Izuku's hand before hurriedly pushing him back to Nezu's office, where the teacher would yell towards Nezu, "Your son, Nezu! He unlocked his quirk!" Nezu would stand up, pushing the chair off behind him, hitting the wall. "Wait, really? What is it?" he would ask, as Izuku would proudly exclaiming, "It's this!" he would say, turning into a small kitten before jumping up on Nezu's desk. Nezu would look on in amazement down at Izuku. "That's great! So, now that you unlocked your quirk, why don't we begin some training?" Nezu would say towards Izuku. Izuku would look towards Nezu, his father, wondering what he meant by that. "Training? What do you mean?" "Well, you are at the Greatest Hero School, of course, and your dad is the principal of it, so why don't we get training you so you can become the greatest hero of all time? You could become just like All Might. How about that, Izuku?" Nezu would say, as Izuku's eyes would widen, sparkling at the same time. "Wait, really? You really mean it?" Izuku would say, pumping his fists back and forth as he was just so excited. This day just couldn't get any better. As Nezu would end up laughing, "Yeah, so, why don't you go ahead and start giving some basic workouts towards Izuku? I'm sure he can handle it," Nezu would say, looking on towards the teacher. "But, Nezu, what type of workouts do you think a 4-year-old could complete? And he's basically 3, he just turned 4 today," would say, as Nezu would only glare on towards the teacher. "He is my son, after all, so why don't you stop talking like he's just a normal 3-year-old, Nezu would say. The teacher would jump back, defensive, shaking his hand, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, Nezu, I didn't mean to upset you. I'll go train your son now," they would say hurriedly, grabbing Izuku and yanking him out of the office. As it would end up now being just in a field, as the teacher would end up telling Izuku that he wants him to run 3 laps around this field, and then he wants him to transform into some sort of cat-like thing or just some sort of animal and to attack him with his best shot. Izuku would nod his head as he would end up just starting to jog around the track. It was quite hard for the young Izuku, as he would barely end up managing to complete the track run, as he would entirely look over towards the teacher as his feet would end up wobbling, being weak after running so far, as Izuku would end up pulling himself together, transforming into a hawk, as he would end up swooping up into the air before flying right down at the teacher head first, before pulling back with his talons out, slashing down towards the teacher, before transforming into a lion and slashing his back as he had been behind him, as the teacher would end up falling down to one knee, holding his chest and back, having been scratched quite hard by it, as blood would start seeping through the teacher's clothing. Izuku would look on towards the teacher before just asking, "Did I go too hard? I'm really sorry about that," Izuku would say. The teacher with a soft voice would say, "It's okay, Izuku. You're fine." As we now cut 5 years into the future, Izuku had just been trained by this teacher for just around these 5 years, as Izuku's now 9. However, this teacher would end up retiring, and a new teacher would end up coming in. This teacher would be Shota Aizawa, as Izuku would also be taking quite the hard tests, being tutored by his father, Nezu. And so Izuku would be taking these tests, but they were just super easy to Izuku. Even Nezu at this age couldn't do something this good, would think to himself, so he would start thinking even more before a light bulb would go off in his head. "Hey, Izuku, do you think you happen to have an hyper-intelligence quirk by any chance?" Nezu would say, as Izuku would start to think for a moment. "I don't know, maybe." would say, not throwing it out of the picture just yet. Nezu had some sort of intelligence work, however, Izuku could possibly have an even better one, so we would decide to give him his hardest test, as Izuku would end up looking through the problems before completely acing it within no time, getting every single question right. As we now see the 9-year-old Izuku walking over after being tutored for the day, as he would end up just seeing Shota Aizawa standing on a field. Izuku would ask Shota Aizawa where his other teacher was, however, Aizawa would only shake his head. Yeah, that teacher just retired. So, since I'm the new Class 1A teacher, I'm gonna be your teacher too. So, you're most likely gonna be training with some of the Class 1A students. Oh, don't think they're not gonna go easy on you. I've told them the 9-year-old's already doing better than most of them, so they're trying to hold back their spot as a hero, or just so that their ego can stay intact and to not be beaten by someone who's like 6 years younger than them. So, why don't you go ahead and begin with attacking me, just so I can get a feel of what your quirk is. Izuku would nod his head before getting into a stance. Aizawa would recognize it as some sort of martial arts stance, as Izuku would end up waiting for Aizawa to pull the first move, as Aizawa would end up erasing Izuku's quirk, as Izuku would grow impatient before rushing over towards Aizawa, turning into a lion and slashing at him. However, nothing would happen. Izuku turning into a lion all just happened up in his head, as Aizawa would end up smiling before punching Izuku right in the gut. Izuku would end up jumping back, holding his gut in pain, before wondering why he didn't turn into a lion. He would start to think for a moment before he would end up realizing it. Oh, so you have a quirk erasing quirk. That's quite the rare one. That's quite interesting, Aizawa, Izuku would say, as he would start to run circles around Aizawa. So Aizawa would end up erasing Izuku's quirk, keeping eyes on Izuku at all times, before Izuku would end up grabbing a pile of dust and throwing it right at Aizawa's eyes. Your eyes are your weak points, Izuku would say. Your eyes, they're your weak points. So without them, you're basically useless, Izuku would say, as he'd still end up running around him. However, Aizawa would continue moving back and forth, as if sensing where Izuku was. However, Izuku instantly realized that it was because of his footsteps. Aizawa could hear his footsteps, so he was tracking where Izuku was by them. So all of a sudden, Izuku would come to a screeching halt, before jumping up in the air, turning into a bird, a very small one too, flying up and over where he was, before softly landing onto the ground right behind Aizawa without making a noise. Right as this would happen, Aizawa would go right where he thought Izuku was, or right where Izuku just was, using just erasing, or not his erasing, but his scarf, trying to capture Izuku. However, nothing was there. As he would end up yanking his scarf back, he would realize no one was there, as suddenly he would end up turning around, finally getting all of the dust out of his eyes, to see a massive lion falling right on top of him, as a scratch would go right down Aizawa's face, and completely all the way back down towards his lower torso area, as Aizawa would end up just wobbling on his feet from how hard and fast the attack was. He would end up smiling to the young boy. That's quite the hard attack you have, Izuku, Aizawa would say, before falling down to the ground in pain. You're not going to be able to do that, any of the students, or else Nezu's going to be mad at me. So try to go a little bit less. Just try to not use as much power as you did on your attacks, alright, when you're forcing the students. There's no need to hurt anybody now, is there? Izuku would only smile down towards Aizawa before apologizing to him. Oh, sorry, Aizawa. I didn't mean to do it like that, he would say, as Aizawa would only shake his head. It's alright, Izuku. As 6 years would end up passing, with Izuku continually being trained by Aizawa, while also just being in Class 1A in general, just learning the hero techniques from there. So he would be in the Class 1A classroom before going up to the Class 2A in Class 1 3A after he turned the age of 10 because Nezu deemed he was just eligible. However, he couldn't graduate just because of his age, being that it was too young. And Nezu didn't want him to be a hero at such a young age either, as he still was quite impulsive and did things that a younger person would do, so he needed more time to mature. So Izuku the upbeat walking in to the entrance exam, Nezu said that he couldn't just pass Izuku right away into UA. He still has to compete with the entrance exam too. So that Izuku would only nod his head before shutting his notebook, walking down at where the entrance exam was being held that day. As we see a stretching Izuku, or he would end up sitting back down, as he would end up taking the written exam, easily flying through it as he had taken it multiple times before, passing it in under 30 minutes, turning it up front, as President Mike would only look just blatantly at Izuku. You really had to show off, Izuku. You couldn't have just sat there for an extra couple of minutes to make everyone think weren't doing us bad. Izuku would just laugh before walking back to his seat, sitting back down. As he would end up sitting there, he would start to think of a strategy that he could do to fight off against all of the robots. As finally 4 hours would pass as the written exam had finished, we see Izuku walking over to where the hero exam would be held, as he was stretching his limbs even more to hopefully get loose so that he wouldn't just not be loose when he was fighting and using his quirk. So once begun, as the doors would end up slowly opening, Izuku would turn into a cheetah, running as fast as he could right into the heart of the city, where tons of robots were located, as all of the robots would turn towards Izuku, aiming their weapons at him, as red dots would be located all around Izuku's body. However, before the robots could do anything, he would turn into the smallest animal he could. Turning into a tiny frog, he would end up being on the ground as all of the robots would lose sight of him, as they would all fire off their weapons, causing them to have to recharge, as Izuku would hop over onto one of the three-pointers before turning into a gorilla, grabbing this three-pointer's head and spinning it around like just a massive weapon, as he would slam this robot into all of the other robots, causing them to either be destroyed or topple over, getting Izuku tons of points in the process, just around 45 of them, as Izuku would drop the robot he used as a hammer to smash all of the robots. He would end up walking around as a gorilla around the street, as one of the students would end up mistaking Izuku as sort of just another obstacle, as Izuku would end up transforming down into a tiny little bird flying up and away, as the student would end up looking up at them before smiling. "Oh, you're not getting away from me that easily," they would say, jumping up before trying to grab Izuku. However, Izuku would only turn down into a tiny little frog, as he would end up landing right onto this person's face, as Izuku would end up jumping up into the air before transforming into just some sort of fish, as he would end up moving his tail end of his body to slap the person right across the face, as they would end up falling back down to the ground with their cheek having just been slapped by some type of fish. Izuku would turn into a bird again, flying off to go and find just another pile of robots. As he would end up spotting them, he would end up transforming into a gorilla, falling down before smashing his fists down to the ground where the robots were, causing the ground to uproot and all of the robots to topple over, causing Izuku to easily stomp on them, destroying them. As Izuku, now with around 80 points, he would end up hearing the ground start to shake. He would lift his head up after smashing another robot's face in, as he would end up looking over his shoulder to see a massive zero-pointer was stomping its way over towards Izuku. As Izuku would land his foot over, turning around to see someone was trapped under a pile of rubble. He would look closer before he would end up seeing a small brunette-haired girl just trapped under a ton of boulders, as Izuku, acting quickly, would transform into a cheetah, running as fast as he could, getting to where she was, sliding over, picking up rock after transforming into a gorilla, grabbing her, throwing her over his shoulder, so he would end up running out of the way, putting her into an alleyway, as Izuku would end up looking up towards the robot that had continually started to move closer and closer towards him. Izuku would transform to a small bird, flying up to where the robot's head was, so he would turn himself into gorilla again, smashing a hole into the robot's metal before transforming into a frog, as he would end up going right into the robot's head, looking for just the core processor of the robot. As he would end up finding it and a ton of wires around it, Izuku would transform back into his gorilla, pulling all of the wires out, causing just the robot to malfunction, as he would end up falling backwards. Izuku would transform into a bird as he would fly through the hole and gap, flying out before going back to the alleyway, where he would end up seeing the girl had passed out. Izuku would start to run around looking for Recovery Girl, as he would end up finding her, so he would then grab Recovery Girl and would fly her over to where the girl was, as Recovery Girl would be sitting on the back of a giant hawk. Izuku would end up dropping her off there, as she would end up taking care of her, as Izuku would end up being told that he can now just go home. As Izuku was walking out, he could hear all of the whispers of just everyone around him. They were whispering how strong he was and that he definitely made it into UA. He shouldn't have even had to take this exam. He was that good. Or just in complete shock that Izuku was just such a good natural hero. As Izuku would be walking back to where Nezu was, he would end up looking towards Nezu, as Nezu would only just laugh. Yeah, you didn't really have to take the exam. After seeing that, you definitely made it into UA. And I'd say, by the looks of it, you're also the first-year representative. So good job, Izuku, Nezu would say, as Izuku would only just laugh. Thanks, Dad, he would say. As we now see Izuku walking back to his house, which his house was located on the UA campus. However, it was in the forest part of it, as Nezu had just decided to build a small house to live on it when he decided to build UA. So with that, there was a small house that he and Izuku lived in, which was like on the boundary of the UA campus. However, Nezu had decided, or even telling Izuku, along with the rest of the students, that he was going to go around to all of the accepted examinees and to ask them if they can move into the UA campus just to ward off any villain attacks and so that they can be safer. Izuku would be sitting down on the couch as all of a sudden his stomach would end up rumbling. He would go to the fridge and pantry, opening it up, but would find that there was no food inside. So, doing the logical thing to do, he would go into town to find something to eat. Grabbing his wallet, he would end up walking out of the UA campus, going into just trying to find a local grocery store. As he would end up finding it, he would look for the best deal he could, as he didn't have as much money as, say, All Might. He wasn't rich, after all. So Izuku find the best deal he could, or just checking out, as he would end up having the food in a bag as he would be walking back to the UA campus. As Izuku would be under an overpass, all of a sudden, a massive slime monster made out of sludge would end up materializing out of nowhere, as he would now be standing, towering over Izuku. Izuku, now staring at the towering sludge villain above him, would think for a moment, wondering what he could do and what strategy he could use to defeat this villain. However, soon as he would end up seeing the sludge villain crashing down on him like a tsunami, he would end up transforming down into a tiny toxic frog and jumping out of the way, as he would then end up jumping onto the side of a wall, as he would end up getting up to a higher position, as the sludge villain would start looking around, wondering where Izuku had went, as he basically just poofed out of existence. As Izuku continued on looking at the sludge villain, you would end up seeing the sludge villain's eyes, as a light bulb would go off in his head, That's it, he would say, as he would end up jumping down towards the sludge villain, as he would end up yelling for the sludge villain to end up turning towards him. However, the sludge villain would hear just the ribbit of a frog, as the sludge villain would turn towards it, wondering what the sound was, as the frog would then transform into a giant hawk, as Izuku would get out of his talons before slashing the sludge villain's eye, causing it to pop, as he would end up screaming in pain and agony. As he would end up falling down to the ground, the sludge would end up dissipating, as he would end up just trying to run away from Izuku, just being in immense pain. Izuku would shrug his shoulders before moving on, just not really caring about anything that went on besides that. He just didn't bother, and he was also very hungry, so he didn't want to waste any time. We now cut forward 2 weeks as we see Izuku sitting in the Class 1A classroom, as he would start to crack his knuckles, wondering what was going to happen for the day. A lot of other students that were going to be his classmates for the next 3 years would end up walking in through the door. Some of them would greet them, saying their name as Izuku would say his, as they would all just go and sit down, while others would just sit down, not even batting an eye towards him and their other classmates. Finally, after a couple of minutes, their teacher would slowly walk his way into the room. Howdy, class. I'm your teacher, Shotaizawa. So, today we're going to be doing a little test. I want to see what all of your quirks are in combat. A blue-haired boy who introduced Izuku as Ida would end up standing up before asking, "But sir, didn't we already do this in combat during the entrance exam?" he would say. Aizawa would only look at him with a blank look before sighing once more. "Can you please quiet down? I want to see..." You didn't let me finish, actually, but I wanted to see just how well you do combat against an actual human instead of a mindless bot that was coded to do something. So now I'll give you 20 minutes to go down and put your UA uniforms on for PE. I don't care how you end up finding it, but you have to do that. And then meet me at Arena 6. It's on the opposite side of campus. So since you only have 20 minutes, I suggest you hurry up. Izuku, who had been in the school for years, would start to slowly make a stroll down towards wherever the locker rooms were, while the rest of the class would end up panicking and just hurrying around the building, wondering where the locker rooms were. They hadn't been given a map, and so they really had no idea where anything was, only knowing where Class 1A was because it was said on the entrance exam disc that they were given, saying that they had made it in. So Izuku would slowly make his way down there, as he would end up finding the locker rooms. Well, he knew, of course, since he'd been basically living there for years. As he would end up finding the locker rooms, he would get changed into his PE uniform before he would end up walking back to where Arena 6 was. As Izuku would be sitting there, he would start to think to himself, I wonder what he meant by a combat training. Nezu said he was most likely going to do some sort of quirk thing, but not anything with combat. Oh well, I guess. He would think to himself as the rest of his classmates would finally make it 10 minutes late after the 20-minute timer had gone off. As Aizawa would be sitting, as he would blatantly look on towards the rest of the class before slowly muttering out, "You're late," he would say, "So, let's begin with the combat training. It's going to be all of you versus Izuku here." Some of them would say, "What? But it's all of us versus one person. There's no chance he's gonna win." Aizawa would only smile towards them before laughing. "Oh, I wouldn't think so. Actually, I'd say your chances of winning are quite close to 0%. Many of them would look on shocked at Aizawa. You can't be serious. This guy can't be that strong, can he?" As Aizawa would only look towards them before just giving a look that said, "Yeah, he's that strong." As would all just be told to step up onto the arena, as Izuku would do so on the opposite side from the rest of his class. he would start to think of a strategy before he would end up realizing, well, since there's a lot of them, they're most likely going to be unorganized, along with the fact that they really haven't even spoken to each other besides a few greetings at the start of the day. So with that, Izuku could use that to his advantage and possibly just to have them mix up or start yelling at each other, causing even more of a distraction. So Aizawa would yell for the match to begin, as Bakugo, who was just grinding his teeth the entire time Aizawa was talking, would end up rushing off towards Izuku, as he would start to think to himself when Aizawa was talking about how great Izuku was, or at least in Bakugo's mind. There is no chance this pebble could be better than me. I should be the one fighting this entire class. Bakugo would think to himself before rushing off to defeat Izuku. Izuku would see Bakugo rushing at him with an angry expression on his face, as Izuku within an instant would realize that Bakugo had some sort of anger issues. As Bakugo would launch himself towards him, propelling himself like a torpedo right at Izuku, he would start to twist and contort his body to throw an explosion at Izuku. However, Izuku would only turn into a tiny little lizard before scattering across. Bakugo would look before seeing a lizard down onto the ground, but he would only go to step on it in frustration. However, all of a sudden, Izuku would then transform into a gorilla, grabbing Bakugo's leg before twirling him around in the air and throwing him right into a ton of his classmates. As Bakugo's body would slam into the classmates, they would end up falling over before some of them would start to yell at Bakugo. "What the hell, Bakugo? You just caused us all to get injured. You shouldn't have gone out there without a plan. We should have stuck together," many of them would say, some of them not saying it at all, only thinking it in their head. Izuku would rush towards them, still in his gorilla form, as Todoroki would go to freeze him. However, Izuku would slide to the left before smashing the ice with his right hand. As Izuku would look over towards where the ice came from, he would end up transforming into a bird before flying up into the air, transforming down into a bigger bird as a hawk, as he would then fly right down towards the ice user before slashing him with his wing, causing him to tumble backwards. As Izuku would do this, he would end up stopping most of his momentum before falling back down to the ground as a giant lion, slashing downwards on the young boy, as Todoroki would see this slash coming fully at him, as he would just feel an impending doom. He would try to stop it with some ice, however, Izuku's attack was far too powerful, going clean through the ice, slashing it into tiny pieces, as it would end up hitting Todoroki, sending him flying out of the arena before slamming into one of the protective walls behind them. Izuku would stare on where the rest of the class was, as Aizawa would end up stepping in before anyone could get hurt. "I've seen enough. You don't need anyone to be like Todoroki over there. So you all are dismissed for the day. You can go home. I don't really care," Aizawa would say, as Izuku would end up just walking back, as Aizawa would end up stopping him. "I thought I told you not to use your full strength, Izuku," Aizawa would say. However, Izuku would end up looking at Aizawa. "If I wasn't going to use my full strength, it'd kind of be disrespectful, you know. Just saying that they're not a worthy opponent to me," Izuku would say. Aizawa would look at the boy before just shaking his head. "I'll let this slide once, alright, Izuku, but don't do it again," he would say, shaking his finger towards him. A couple of more weeks would pass with them doing some basic training exercises and some few combat training exercises against Izuku or Aizawa. As Izuku, why yes, a student, he had already gone through everything they had at least once. So Izuku was already smarter than them with his hyper-intelligence quirk and was already stronger of them. It made some of them think they were leagues out of being heroes. Is this what all heroes are like? However, some of them, this would only give more motivation for them to become stronger, as all of them would end up sitting at their dorm rooms, as they would all be walking to school. Many of them would just be talking and whispering about how today was their first real hero training. Sure, they've done some other types of training, but this was going to be the real thing. It was legit. They just couldn't wait and couldn't believe it. as they would all be walking down towards the UA building. It would all walk in, going into Class 1A before sitting down. All of the sudden, though, they would start to hear stomping from down the hall. As all of the sudden, the door would smash into tiny little timbers of wood, as there stood in the doorway was a shining yellow golden figure, as they would all stare just in amazement, as there stood the number one hero, All Might. Many of them would stand up yelling, "All Might, it's the number one hero! Don't tell me you're our hero teacher, are you?" Many of them would say in just pure excitement and joy, many of them stuttering in the process just from pure excitement, as Might would end up looking on towards them before giving a laugh. "Well, I guess I am your hero teacher, huh? Well, you all can't be heroes without hero costumes, can you? So, thankfully for the support course, they all happen to design your hero costumes based on a basic understanding of what you wanted," All Might would say before smashing his hand onto a button, shattering the remote in the process, as this mechanical thing would start to come out of the wall, revealing many briefcases with all of the students' hero costumes. They would all look on in just pure amazement, rushing up to them, grabbing their hero costume, and seeing the suitcase with their name branded on it with gold. On the suitcase, that is, as they would all stare at it amazement, for Mites would tell them to go down to City C, where they had training just last week, and to get into their hero costumes in the locker room, and then go to City C so that they can do their hero training. All of them would agree before rushing down to where the locker rooms were, as they just couldn't hold in their excitement. They couldn't wait. So, as they would all get changed, they would all meet up with All Might, as they would up just greeting him, as he would then begin to explain what they were going to be doing. "Alright, class, so let's begin. Today we are going to be doing a Heroes vs. Villains assignment. There's going to be teams of 2 and exactly 2 teams, a hero team and a villain team. The villain team will be tasked to go into the building with 5 minutes and to hide a papier-mâché device supplied to by, thankfully, the support course, of course. So they're going to hide that device, and then the hero team is going to go into just the base or just the building, and are going to try to either capture both of the villains or to find the device by touching it, and that will give them the victory. The villains win by draining out a 15-minute clock or capturing both of the heroes. So let's begin with choosing the teams. And the hero team will be Izuku Midoriya and Ochako Uraraka, All Might would say, before putting his hand back down into a fishbowl and getting out another name. The villain team will be Tenya Ida and Bakugo Katsuki, would say, as the villains would end up stepping up to go hide the device, as Uraraka and Izuku would end up starting to make a plan. Izuku would tell Uraraka that she should go ahead, as he knows that Bakugo is most likely going to try to get revenge on him, since he was easily so able to defeat him from the first day of school. So he's most likely going to try to get revenge on him, so he's going to be rash and to try to push him as soon as possible. So when that happens, which will inevitably be, Uraraka should just go around the fight and go and face off against Ida. Uraraka would nod her head, as the 5 minutes would end up being up, as they would then walk into the building. Izuku would look around looking for any signs of Bakugo, however there wasn't any. As soon as they got onto the second floor, though, all of that started to change, as Izuku would start to see sparks flying everywhere, as all of the sudden Bakugo would explode through one of the walls before staring angrily at Izuku. Izuku would yell, "Now, Uraraka, go!" He would say as Uraraka would yes to him before rushing off, as Bakugo wouldn't even bat an eye towards her before staring off towards Izuku. "You're gonna regret messing with me, Izuku. I'm gonna teach you that you're just a fly right in my path, and I'm just gonna swat you down like the dirt you are," Bakugo said. Izuku would think to himself that it had made no sense at all, but oh well, as Bakugo would explode off towards Izuku. As Izuku would only just dodge Bakugo's attack, backhanding him in the process, causing Bakugo to end up slamming down into the ground and hitting the wall right beside him. Bakugo would end up getting up within an instant, turning his head vigorously, looking on towards Izuku. "How dare you!" he would say towards Izuku. However, Izuku would only smile towards him. "I figured out your weakness, Bakugo. Well, I've known it for quite a while. I just decided to spare you of that knowledge. Your weakness. It's your anger. You'll never become a hero with anger like that, Bakugo. You must realize that. You're gonna have to deal with civilians that are already scared enough. They don't need a villain trying to save them," Izuku would say, as Bakugo would only stare on towards Izuku before yelling that'll make him pay for saying that he was some sort of villain. Rushing off towards Izuku would send more and more explosions. However, Izuku would continue on, dodging them. And just like Izuku thought, Bakugo's attacks were all over the place. They weren't coordinated. If Bakugo had a clear head and he wasn't just basing it off of anger, he would be able to coordinate his attacks so that they didn't look sloppy and all over the place. However, anger can work in some cases, allowing you to go beyond your limits and to use your fullest potential of strength because you're angry. However, with this is just a blind rage. Yes, it will make him stronger, but without any coordination, all that strength just really is useless. And so with Bakugo rushing at Izuku, with him still dodging, Izuku would end up ducking before turning into a gorilla. Holding his fist in hand, he would jump up, leaping upward, the process punching Bakugo right in the jaw, sending him flying upwards, slamming through the ceiling. As some of the drywall, just ceiling bits from the ceiling would fall down to the ground, hitting Izuku. However, he would end up looking back up at Bakugo, who had now just been unconscious by the punch of a gorilla, along with going right through the ceiling. So he would end up being dangling in the ceiling. Izuku would get him out of the ceiling before tying him up, just in case if he were to wake up at all, that he would just be out of the fight entirely. Izuku would end up rushing up to the top, where he would see an injured Ida and a just unconscious Uraraka tied up. Izuku would end up looking over there, as he would end up looking around, seeing what the pillars were missing, along with that, and there was a massive hole right through the ground. Izuku would stare right at that ground before asking what had happened there, as Ida would end up saying that that hole just had appeared out of nowhere. Izuku would end up thinking for a moment before remembering that Bakugo had put his hand up right as he was about to make contact with the ceiling. Maybe he tried to use an explosion to put all of his momentum going back down. I guess it didn't work. As Izuku would see the battered Ida, would end up realizing that this fight was already over. Izuku would tell Ida that it's best just to give up. However, he couldn't let his pride as Ida to just go to waste, as he would end up jumping over the hole, rushing at Izuku. However, Izuku would end up dodging this before flying over and touching the bomb, turning back into a human within an instant. "Nice try, Ida," Izuku would say calmly, walking over and picking up Uraraka, jumping down through the hole and grabbing Bakugo. As he would then end up walking back, All Might would end up congratulating him. "Good morning, class," Aizawa would say with a straight face, as all of the classmates of Izuku would walk into the room. As all of them would be sitting there, Aizawa would then announce that they all need to go put their hero costumes on, as they will be heading towards the USJ. They would all rush down towards the locker rooms, as today was their first ever field trip at the UA High School. So they would all rush down to the locker rooms, getting changed very quickly into their hero costumes before getting onto the bus, as it would then speed off towards the USJ. None of them ever would realize how much of a mistake this would be, as they would pull up to the USJ, as all of them would pile out of the bus. As there at the top of the steps of the USJ stood the Hero 13. "Good morning, Class 1A. It's a pleasure to meet you all. As some of you may know and some of you may not, I am the Hero 13. I specialize in rescue missions." And that is basically what we're going to be learning here today at the USJ. So, why don't we go ahead and head in, she would say, opening up one of the doors, as the class would walk in admiring the view, staring at all of the different zones just in awe. It just looked so majestic and amazing, they would all think to themselves. Looking around, would all see all of this. However, one of the students made a compelling observation. They even have fake villains here? This place is awesome! They would say with their voice changing as they realized how cool this place was, as many of the students' heads would jolt towards the middle or wherever the student was pointing. Yo, that's awesome! I can't believe they have fake villains here! This place is amazing! Many of them would mutter to themselves or yell out. However, Aizawa and 13 knew these weren't fake villains. They were real. As they would be staring down at the villains, Aizawa would crack his knuckles before telling 13 to protect the students. Many of the students would be confused. Why would Aizawa be acting like this? This is all a part of the routine and plan, right? They would think to themselves. However, it was not. As Aizawa would be jumping down there, he would start to fight the pile of villains. However, Kirogiri, the portal hero, would end up portaling himself or moving himself up to wherever the students were. Good morning, Class 1A. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I'm Kirogiri, a portal villain for the League of Villains. I just want to ask this now to get it out of the way, but do any of you fancy being a villain at all? Kirogiri would say, however, all of them would shake their heads no. Kirogiri would sigh before saying, well, I'm sorry I have to do this then. Kirogiri would say, opening up his hand as a portal would go right underneath many of the students, so they would then fall down through the portal. As all of the students would be falling through the portal, they would be separated throughout the different zones. As we now see Izuku falling down, crashing in water, so he would transform into a fish, observing what was happening. As you would see many villains just all swimming in the water, staring up at the boat, where he would then see Tsuyuasui jump over onto the boat with Mineta. Izuku, seeing this, would then transform into a massive shark, where he would then go around biting many of the villains there. As they would see this huge great white shark coming right at them, they would start to panic, as they've never seen something that just looked so menacing before. As Izuku would be coming there with killer intent, he would snap his jaw down, biting down on these low-life villains. As he made sure not to kill them, but it sure as hell hurt a lot. As he would end up taking many of them out, would then transform back into a just dolphin, where he would then hop up out of the water, transforming into a bird. He would then land onto the boat. As he would see Tsuyuasui and Mineta sitting there, they would then thank him for defeating all of the villains. He would say it's no problem, however, now the only problem is swimming across to get to the mainland, he would think. However, he decided not to do now, would rather go and save many of his classmates, as Izuku would then turn into a hawk before telling them that he'll just drop them off at the shore, as they would each grab onto one of his legs, as he would then fly over, dropping them off before swooping out and going to find some of his other classmates. And one by one or two by two, he would bring all of these classmates over towards the middle, where there was an uproot in the concrete due to Aizawa's fight with the Nomu, which many of them were observing behind the rock, scared that they might be noticed, as they had seen their homeroom teacher start to struggle against some mindless beast that just looked like something from a horror movie. So you'd be watching this beast continue to slam its fist down to the bloody Aizawa, as it just looked like Aizawa could do nothing at all. They would be staring on as Aizawa would continue to be beaten and battered by this Nomu like it was nothing, before the Nomu would raise Aizawa's head up into the air, dangling his limp body, as he would then wind back his arm with Aizawa's head still in hand, chucking the body, causing it to fly out, hitting the USJ doors, as Aizawa would then fly out there, smashing against the concrete, finally landing up against a tree, stopping him. As all of the students would look on in complete shock, Izuku knew that now that Aizawa was gone, that 13 must be, he would think. However, he would then see the body of 13 lying up at the ground at the top of the stairs, as he would then stare at it, and that leaves him. He's the strongest one left, he would think. So that means it's my job to protect them. Izuku would say it's his job to protect his friends. Izuku would stand up before looking down at his friends. He would tell them that he's going to cause a distraction and that they need to leave, as he would then jump up, transforming into a gorilla, rushing over before pounding his fists into the chest of the Nomu. However, the Nomu didn't budge at all. Izuku would just stare on in shock. However, the blue-haired villain would start laughing maniacally. "You think a puny little punch of a gorilla is going to hurt this Nomu? You're simply mistaken. It is a shock absorption quirk, a regeneration quirk, and a strength quirk. There's simply no chance you have at defeating it," Shigaraki would say, before laughing once again. Izuku would jump back before looking back to where his friends were, however, to see that they didn't budge at all. They were all frozen in fear, frozen in time. They just couldn't get themselves or bring themselves to move or leave Izuku behind. As Izuku would be staring at them, he would yell for all of them to leave. However, they just couldn't, as the Nomu would then rush towards Izuku, pounding both of his open fists right into the side of Izuku's head, slamming it together. Izuku would turn into a lizard to escape the Nomu's grasp, or crawling down as the Nomu would find the lizard, picking it up by its tail, dangling it around. However, Izuku would then transform into a lion before slashing at the Nomu, causing blood and slashes to start having blood drain out of the Nomu's chest area. However, it would quickly heal, proving that the regeneration quirk wasn't a lie. As Izuku would see this, he would start to realize how weak he really was. There really wasn't a chance he was going to be able to beat it. Sure, he knew that its shock absorption quirk can only absorb so much, and that it wasn't just a nullification one. However, he'd have to at least punch it hundreds of times in his gorilla form to even be able to defeat it. There's no chance he would be able to do that, you would think. And right as he was thinking this, a punch would fly, hitting Izuku right across the cheek. So he would then fly, slamming into the fountain. As concrete of the fountain would fly up into the air, landing back down onto Izuku's body. As he would slowly get himself to get up, he would wobbly look over towards his class and then back at the Nomu once again. He would look at him, seeing all of their scared faces, and would yell for them to run. However, before he could finish his sentence, the Nomu would come in with another punch right across the face before uppercutting Izuku, sending him flying into the air and then slamming him back down into the ground. As Izuku's body would lay there to the ground, all of a sudden a blinding white light would shine out as all of the people in the USJ would shield their eyes from the light, including the Nomu. As once the light subsided, there stood a massive green dragon staring down at the Nomu. As Izuku would look at himself, realizing that he had transformed into a mythical beast, a mythical monster, a dragon. He would stare at himself before feeling tons of power. Now he could defeat the Nomu. The very thought of losing his friends, losing this fight, failing his friends, it just couldn't linger in Izuku's mind, causing Izuku to just need to get stronger, and that need caused this quirk to evolve, allowing him to just be able to transform into any mythical beast/animal. As Izuku would be looking down at his dragon form, he would give off a roar, sending fire blazing into the sky as the roof of the USJ would catch fire. So the roof would start collapsing in on itself as panels of the USJ would start falling down to the ground. As Izuku would then stare over towards his class, as a look of horror was on their face. Was it just another villain? Was Izuku killed? They knew Izuku couldn't transform into mythical beasts. They'd asked him before. However, this couldn't be Izuku. They would think, just wondering, they truly had lost. A look of pure fear and horror lingered onto their faces, knowing that all of them were doomed and were going to die. As Izuku would see this, he would then stare back down at the Nomu before rushing over towards it, flying down, swooping in, slashing the Nomu with his mighty claws, or kicking Nomu with its wings, sending it flying backwards. As the Nomu would get up flying towards Izuku would clamp down his jaws right onto the Nomu's head, causing it to decapitate the Nomu. So the Nomu's body would then fall down to the ground, completely dead, not able to regenerate its own brain. As Izuku would see the Nomu body fall down, Shigaraki would then say, "Good luck with that," before going into a portal. As Izuku would stare at all of his classmates. However, he would end up realizing something. During his small fight with the Nomu in his dragon form, he had managed to hurt many of his classmates. As we come back just a few seconds prior, when Izuku had kicked the Nomu back with his wings, sending him flailing back, Izuku had also caused a mass of pieces of concrete to fly into the air, slamming into many of his classmates, causing blood to pour out of many of them, whether it was on their face, leg, arms, or just anywhere on their body in general. As Izuku would see his injured classmates all lying onto the ground, he would all see them staring on at what he had done. He was no better than a villain. He was a monster. How could he have done this to his own class? How could he have done this? He would think to himself. So many of the classmates who were still awake would end up looking at Izuku, just giving him the look that said, "Please, just go away. Please." It was a look of true horror, something that scared Izuku. What has he done? Izuku would end up seeing the falling building as the roof would start to collapse on itself, collapsing in on Izuku. However, he would roar, causing fire to spew up, as Izuku would then fly off into the direction of the forest, transforming into a bird. While he was flying, he would end up falling down to the ground, landing down, as he would transform into a dragon before transforming into a bunch of different animals: a penguin, a gorilla, then a hawk, and then back to his normal body. As his face lay down onto the ground, he would stare at his hands as they would start to shake, as he would then clench them. "What have I done?" he would say, putting his head resting it on a tree, as his hands would clamp down right onto his forehead. "I can't believe what I did," he would say. As we now cut back to the USJ, as Bakugo and Todoroki, the two that barely managed to stay awake, would slowly pull out one by one all of their injured classmates, setting them down onto the ground, many of them having wounds from the flying concrete or being hit by Izuku's wing, while others had terrible burns due to the fire, to the blistering ash landing on them from the roof burning. As ambulances and police cars would slowly pull up, not after Bakugo and Todoroki had to slowly walk over towards the UA, as Ida had never managed to escape to go tell them, and All Might was insanely busy, and he wasn't even able to make it this time. As they would slowly make their way to the high school building, telling Nezu to bring just heroes to the USJ before collapsing right at its foot. As he would go to the USJ with tons of heroes and ambulances, being told by Bakugo to do this. As Bakugo would be put to Recovery Girl's office, he would go over towards the USJ, seeing Todoroki healing many of the just fire burns with his ice. However, it only subsided the pain. As Nezu would stare on at this shock and just all the pain and suffering that was going on before his eyes. However, he would end up realizing something. Where's Izuku? He would say. However, none of them knew what to say. They only just thought Izuku had died. Some of them thought the dragon might have been Izuku, but yet, why would the dragon attack them? It just didn't make any sense, many of them would think. As we cut forward a week, as all of the Class 1A are still in the hospital recovering from of their wounds and burns. Nezu would be sitting at his office with All Might and a ton of other heroes surrounding him. "So, Nezu, what do you think we should do?" Any of them would ask him. However, Nezu would only shake his head. The stories the students have told of a dragon after a blinding light. I think that dragon was Izuku. Bakugo told that the dragon flew into the forest. That was the last they saw of him. "I think we should start searching for it," Nezu would say. We now see Izuku walking along the edge of a river, just staring on at what's in front of him. However, his mind causes him to look down towards the river as he now sees his reflection. But it's not him. It's twisted and contorted to look like a monster, a dragon staring right back at him. The same dragon that he had turned into and had possibly killed some of his classmates. As Izuku had left and hadn't even gotten any word since he's gone, he doesn't know if he killed any of his classmates or if they're alright. He just has no clue what to do. We now see many of the UA teachers rushing around, gathering up people to get a search party to find a missing person. With Izuku being the son of Nezu, the principal of UA, they were allowed to switch up Izuku's identity in the media so that they don't know it's a UA student, causing a ton of bad publicity on them. So Izuku would be given a fake identity by Nezu and would just be using that to try to find him, only going off of sort of looks. Just saying it's a coincidence that they were a UA student. However, all of the classmates of Izuku knew that it really was Izuku being missing. He wasn't even in the class after all. So Izuku, after a month would be passed of Izuku just training, hoping to better himself and to get a stronger grip on that power, as Izuku had gone so far into the forest, transforming into a bird and flying hundreds upon hundreds of miles away so that they could never find him. Nezu knew Izuku could fly very far, but he didn't know exactly how far, only searching in around 100-mile radius from the USJ, which was simply just too small. So Izuku would easily just be able to continue on training even in his dragon form, as he was in the middle of nowhere in a forest, just destroying the forest, using his fire and then putting it out as well, just doing this over and over again, practicing as this dragon, sometimes transforming into other mythical beasts. So Izuku would continue on doing this as we now cut back to UA. A month had passed since the disappearance of Izuku Midoriya, as I'll see all of the students walking into the classroom. Alright, class. Hopefully, one of you all win sports festival in honor of Izuku. That's all I'm gonna give you. We haven't found Izuku yet, but now he's been long enough gone in the wild that we're changing the search from an alive person to a dead one. So we're just looking for a body now. That doesn't mean Izuku's dead. Far from it. Izuku has a lot of survival skills, but we don't know if he might have encountered something or died in the process. Aizawa would say, as all of the students would stare on at Aizawa, just saddened by one of their classmates, the strongest one at that, who had helped them train, was now gone. They just didn't understand it at all. As we now see all of them walking into the UA Sports Festival Coliseum, as 40 minutes had passed, as they had all gotten changed and had just been introduced into the sports festival, as all of them would be staring on at the crowd, many of them shutting their eyes from all of just the flashing cameras onto them. They would all stare up at the entire crowd, just knowing that this year was going to be quite interesting with all this people wanting to see what they are capable of. As Midnight would then step up, announcing that the first event is going to be a race. and without Izuku, this race would go off quite easy for Bakugo and Todoroki. As the race would start, Bakugo would rush off, exploding past everyone, slamming his hand into the massive zero-pointer before causing the zero-pointer to tumble back down as he would continue going forward, as he would then just hop over the massive cave where he was supposed to hop from Rock Island to Rock Island, as he would then even see just the minefield, which he would be able to explode easily over as well, flying over it with ease. Todoroki wouldn't be too far behind him, just freezing a path over and making a ramp to go over the zero-pointer, then just freezing a path straight along and getting second place as he wasn't very far behind. So with Todoroki in second and Bakugo in third, the rest of their class would end up finishing in somewhat similar places, just around anywhere from 5th to 20th, around there. So with that event done, the second event could begin after a 20-minute wait, where all of the students would wish each other luck, as the cavalry battle would then begin. Not before Midnight would then casually explain that first place just happened to have a 10 million point headband. And so with this, everyone would be staring devilishly at Bakugo, just wanting that 10 million point headband. However, Bakugo would only yell, "What the hell are you freaks staring at?" He would say, causing many of the people that were about to go after Bakugo to back off. However, this didn't stop everyone, as many people would still go right after Bakugo, propelling themselves forward on at him, as Bakugo would easily dodge many of their attacks, and while some would end up coming towards him, with the help of Kirishima, Nari, and Mina, he was easily able to dodge their attacks and even explode some of them, causing him to take their headbands, even though he clearly didn't need to get any more points. As Bakugo would continue doing this, Todoroki would spot an opening before slamming his foot down onto the head of someone else. So they would ask Todoroki what the hell was that for. However, an iceberg would go right out, right freezing Bakugo, as he would start looking around like what the hell happened. As Todoroki would then casually go over, grabbing the headband off of Bakugo's head and pulling it off. "Nice try, Bakugo," Todoroki would say, smacking the back of his head as he did this. As Bakugo would then look on angrily at Todoroki, so he would then explode off, yelling that he's gonna kill Todoroki. However, before he can even get an attack off, the buzzer rang. As Bakugo would fall down to the ground, not able to use his power due to Aizawa erasing it, he then just wondered, "Damn it, I was so close." Thankfully, with the amount of points he had collected as extra, they were able to go on towards the next round. So we now see Shinso's fight, which, with Izuku not there, I'm going to add in Moneta, as Moneta would stare on at Shinso as the match would begin, and Moneta would start throwing his ape balls right at just Shinso. However, he would dodge all of them, so they just didn't reach him, being so far away. And Moneta not being the smartest or sharpest tool in the shed, and with Ojiro not warning him what Shinso's quirk might be, he would talk to Shinso, answering one of Shinso's questions, causing him to be brainwashed. And since Moneta doesn't have one for all, or does he? I'm just kidding. But since Moneta doesn't have one for all, he's going to end up falling out of the arena, as Shinso would then move on towards the next round. However, with this, everyone now knew that Shinso had some sort of brainwashing quirk. And so with this, when his next round would go up against Todoroki, the match would go quite just quickly. Todoroki wouldn't answer any of Shinso's questions, knowing that he had a brainwashing quirk, and so he would just plant his foot on the ground and would send a massive iceberg towards Shinso, who, not having a strength quirk, wouldn't be able to smash it, causing him to be consumed by the iceberg, as Todoroki would go on towards the semi-finals, where he would then face off against Tenya Ida. Now, this match would go quite easily, as Todoroki would know that Ida was going to try to use his running-based quirk, And so all he had to do was just layer the entire arena in ice, and then Ito wouldn't be able to go anywhere, being it be too slippery. So with that, Todoroki would do so, as Ito would start to slip and fall, causing Todoroki to just walk over to him and kick him out of bounds, giving Todoroki the victory to then move on towards the final round, where he would be facing off against Bakugo. As the two now strongest Class 1A students would walk up to the arena, Bakugo would end up yelling that he needs to use his full power to beat him. However, with the absence of Izuku, Todoroki would never just use his fire. And so, as the match would begin, Bakugo would jump off towards Todoroki, and this match would pretty much go just like canon. Todoroki would try to send tons of icebergs at Bakugo, however, they would all just be effortlessly destroyed by an explosion. As all of these icebergs would end up breaking, Bakugo would continue making advancements towards Todoroki until he was right in front of him, where he would then punch him across the face and put an explosion right into Todoroki's chest, as Todoroki would then end up just being knocked out, not being able to do anything, and also being insanely and just having tons of frostbite. And so with that, Bakugo would win. However, he wouldn't accept this victory since Todoroki didn't use 100% of his full power, and that's where Bakugo would end up holding up Todoroki, just mad or pissed off that he didn't use his full power. So it's basically just exactly as canon. However, as all of the students would make their way back to their classroom after receiving their medals, if they had gotten any, be Bakugo, Todoroki, and Tokiyami, they would all just be seated down as Isawa would walk in along with Nezu carrying tons of papers. So they would hand it all out. It was the heroes that decided that they wanted just to have these students on just as an internship for them, as this happens every single year after the UA Sports Festival. And so with all of them getting their papers passed out, all of them would choose their same internships they had chosen in canon My Hero Academia. As all of this would be happening with Izuku having one for all and being absent, Gran Torino would also never just be seen in this story, not having a place for him, at least not yet. So with that, we now cut forward a week as we see Ida rushing down alleyways looking for the hero killer Stain, as revenge had blinded his mind, as that's all he could think about, wanting to defeat Stain, as he was just completely mad and full of revenge and sorrow that now his brother couldn't even be a hero anymore, all because of Stain's stupid ideals. As Ito would be rushing around, finally he would stop, hearing the groans of agony of a hero. He would look over as he would see Stain about to kill the hero, Native, as Ito would jump in, going for a kick, as Stain would only block it with one of his swords. "Oh, what's this? A new challenger? Quite the interesting thing, isn't it?" With a staring down at Native. "This stupid hero's only in it for the money," Stain would say. Ito would end up going full power with his cork, as his engines would be going full blast. Stain would only knock him back, causing him to fall down towards the ground. As Stain would be slashing down at Ida, about to kill him, not wanting to be busy with another person, all of a sudden a cloaked figure would end up appearing out of nowhere, holding Stain's just sword within a massive dragon hand, snapping it and crushing it within his hand. As the hand would then disappear back into the cloak, as a single eye would end up opening, causing Stain to have shivers go right down his spine, as Stain would be staring at this yellow eye staring directly at him that just had an aura that said, "Don't mess with me." Stain would try to escape, sensing danger, however he wouldn't be able to, as this shadowed figure would end up elbowing him with another dragon arm, as he would end up being sent flying backwards, slamming his head against a dumpster. As his head would fall down limp, he would shakily look up to the hooded figure now reveal himself. It was a green-haired boy with yellow eyes staring directly at him, as if these yellow eyes glowed in the night. As these arms would end up morphing back into human ones, Izuku would grab the hero killer by the neck, lifting him up off to the ground before tossing him into the dumpster and shutting it. Izuku would look over at both of the heroes, as the hero native would end up scurrying off, not caring about the UA student in front of him being Ida, only caring about his well-being. As Izuku would walk over towards Ida, Izuku would then give him just a look, saying, "Look, I'm sorry about what happened at the USJ." Right as Ida was about to respond to Izuku, a flying Nomu would come out of nowhere. As Izuku would see this, the Nomu would come down, trying to grab him. However, he would roll out of the way before breathing fire, exterminating the Nomu, causing it to just disintegrate in the blaze. As Izuku, through his training, had his Gork evolve even further, to the point where he can just use the abilities of his beasts without turning into them. However, they're quite weakened when he's doing this, so he's not as strong as if he would be if he was in the actual beast or animal form. So that Izuku would then look towards Ida and ask, "So, what was that?" He would say as Ida would only shake his head. "You're fine, Izuku. You did nothing wrong. You heard us trying to save us. So, and even then, we would have possibly been killed if you didn't do anything about that bird monster. So, actually, I'd like to thank you." Izuku would nod his head, thanking Ida for understanding. As we now, it's a day ahead, as we see Izuku walking into Nezu's office, or his father's. "Hello, Father. I guess we meet again, finally. Guess you can stop the search efforts for me," Izuku would say, as Nezu would only just laugh, sipping some tea. "Well, I've already cancelled them. Ida told me about you, but I told him to keep it a secret besides from me. I want to see the look on Aizawa and the rest of your classmates' faces," Nezu would say, as Izuku would get an evil smirk. "Oh, that would actually be quite fun," he would say, as Nezu would only nod his head. As would then both walk down towards Class 1A, as Nezu would then walk into the room, saying that he was here to announce that they're going to be taking their final exams today. All of a sudden, however, Izuku would end up stepping into the room and just giving off a simple "yo," you would say. However, one student would end up getting up, walking right behind him, as this student, being Chaco Uraka, would then raise her fist above Izuku before slamming it down into Izuku's head. "You idiot! We were all worried about you over a month for nothing!" She would yell as Izuku would look at her like, "Some of us even thought you were dead," she would continue. Izuku would only keep on kind of awkwardly laughing. "I actually just decided to train for that time. Sorry if I worried you at all," he would say, so the rest of the class would only blatantly look at him like he was a complete idiot. As Izuku would go sit back down, Aizawa would continue with the lesson, saying that they are now going to be taking the final exams. As a day would pass after they took the written exams, as it was finally time for the main exams, as Izuku would end up looking up onto the board, where he would see whether that as a warm-up and just to test if Izuku really was ready and to see if his month-long training session actually worked, he's going to be facing off against all of Class 1A one more time, right before all of them had to face off against the heroes. So Izuku, not wanting to hurt their chances and make them take summer school by injuring them, he would go as weak as he possibly could. Well, not exactly, just weak enough so that he could easily defeat them all, but it's still going to not hurt them at all, not like if he went full dragon strength and just one-punched everybody. So as Izuku would walk up onto the arena, he would start to stretch, as you would then hear some of his classmates talking that he's probably washed up, having not to fight for quite a while. As Aizawa would begin after telling Izuku to go easy on them, as he would then rush towards them. As all of them would rush right at Izuku would easily dodge many of their attacks or blocking them with ease or grabbing Uraraka's fist, turning it, and then punching her across the face. So he would then turn around, kicking someone right in the head, this being Kaminari, taking out 2 of them with ease, as he would then look towards everyone else. He would then transform into a dragon, looking on right at all of them, as some of them would just only look on, just in complete shock. I guess the rumors were true. He can turn into mythical beasts, one of them would say, as Izuku would be staring down at them. Many of them would just walk out. However, Bakugo and Todoroki would be the only ones left, as all of the others wanted to save their energy. As Izuku would stare down at them, he would then turn into a tiny lizard, falling down to the ground as he would then walk over towards Bakugo. Bakugo would be looking wherever Izuku was, as Izuku would start to walk up onto Bakugo's leg. As Bakugo would start to feel this, he would look down, as all of the sudden, Izuku would then transform into a massive phoenix, as he would then spray Bakugo with fire, as the fire would just completely consume Bakugo, and so would it do to Todoroki. As Izuku would then evaporate the fire, causing it to extinguish, he would then see both Bakugo and Todoroki were standing there completely unharmed, as Izuku had made the flames just visual and not really painful. So, with that out of the way, they could finally commence with the hero final exams. As Izuku would be reading down a list, he would find that he just happened to be paired up with Uchako Uraraka, the same person that just happened to slam her fist right down into Izuku's head. Great, Izuku would think. He also found out he would be versing All Might. Even better, now he can show his true strength and teamwork. As Izuku's classmates, some of them would go while some of them wouldn't. As they had failed or passed all of this, Izuku's match just happened to be the grand finale. He was facing off against the #1 hero after all. So as Izuku would walk in, he would stare down all the way on the opposite side of the city, knowing that All Might was all the way down there. As Izuku, knowing All Might was all the way down there, as the match would begin, Izuku would tell Uraraka that All Might's probably gonna be here any time now, as all of a sudden All Might would pop out of nowhere, going to take out Uraraka, hoping to take out the weakest first. However, Izuku would step in, blocking All Might's punch, as he would look over towards Uraraka and giving her a nod as she would and rush off, hoping to try to make it towards the other exit, and that would also give them the victory. However, All Might would break free of Izuku's grip and would rush to go try to capture Uraraka. However, he wasn't fast enough, as Izuku would then be right in front of Uraraka as she continued on running, as he would transform into a massive dragon, spewing fire from his mouth, causing it to go right at All Might. Getting a direct hit, he would be sent flying backwards, slamming into a dumpster. He would pick himself up before rushing off, as him hitting that dumpster had caused all of his weights to break off. As All Might, now going 100%, would rush over towards Izuku, punching the dragon square across the face. However, Izuku wouldn't budge, grabbing onto All Might before spinning round and round, throwing All Might into a massive just grouping of buildings. As they would all start to pile and topple over onto All Might would slowly pick himself up out of there. As he would now be staring directly on at Izuku, he would rush over towards the dragon, grabbing him. However, Izuku would transform into a tiny little lizard before scattering away into the shadows. All Might would look on to where Izuku had gone to. However, Izuku would then appear from right behind All Might, now as a phoenix, as he would spray fire all over All Might, causing massive burns to go all over his body. As All Might would be sent flying down after being sprayed with fire, he would look up to see Izuku coming right back down at him. As All Might would barely try to dodge this, however, it was too late. Izuku slammed both of his fists, now as a gorilla, right into All Might's chest, causing immense pain in the old hero. As the old hero would stand up, backing up once more, he would make a run for it, hoping that he could outrun Izuku. As Izuku would end up transforming into a Pegasus, a horse with wings, as this horse would end up running it while also flying, and would end up making it to All Might with extreme ease, having been insanely fast. As Izuku now there, he would transform into a gorilla, punching All Might right across the face, sending him down into a dumpster, as Izuku would then grab this dumpster and would then fling the dumpster as a dragon now, as he would then fly out of the city, as Izuku would then walk out the entrance as Uraraka had already made it there. All of Izuku's classmates just looked on in complete shock. He just beat the #1 hero, All Might. Yeah, he's strong, but he's this strong? Many of them would think, even after taking 1 month break from UA? Nezu really wasn't worried about this since Izuku had passed the first year like twice already by now, so he really couldn't care less. However, with Izuku beating All Might, Nezu would also be impressed. He didn't think Izuku was actually that strong. However, he was severely mistaken, as Izuku had thrown All Might completely out of the arena. As Izuku would be given the victory along with Uraraka, they would then be told that they are now dismissed for a week as a break and just as a gift, as after that weekend break, they are going to be going to the summer training camp, and that's where they're going to be training as a hell for 1 week. They're going to be training day and night, day after day, for exactly 7 days. So you best prepare yourself by getting outside and running each day, at least, as he would say before walking off, dismissing all of the students. As they would all just walk off to go do their own thing, Izuku would be walking away, as Bakugo would then walk up to Izuku before saying that Izuku isn't much far above him, and that he's going to catch up to him any day now, and he's going to be able to defeat him. Izuku would look over towards Bakugo before laughing. "Good luck with that, Bakugo," he would say. So Bakugo would only shake his head, grabbing Izuku's arm as he was trying to leave. "You don't get it, Izuku. I'm going to beat you in a fight. Whether it's today, tomorrow, or a year from now, it's going to happen." Izuku would stare on at Bakugo before just laughing. "All right, Bakugo, why don't we go ahead and have a one-on-one right here? Let's see if you'll actually beat me, or if it will be in an eternity from now." Izuku would say as Bakugo would only smile, as he would jump at Izuku, going for an explosion. However, Izuku would dodge, grabbing Bakugo's neck, slamming him down onto the ground. As Bakugo's desire to win would make his quirk evolve, as he could now shoot explosions out from his own feet, as he would use explosions in his feet to get out of Izuku's grasp, now floating into the air, as Izuku would then transform into a tiny little bird flying into the air as well, before he would then fly into a tree. As another bird, the exact same Izuku had transformed into, would fly out of the tree as Bakugo would go over and grab it, before cooking it into a massive piece of fried chicken. However, Izuku would end up appearing right out of the tree, right as Bakugo was doing this, before just getting punched by a gorilla. So Bakugo would flop down onto the ground. Izuku would then look at him. "I guess it's over then. Guess you're not gonna beat me for a while. However, at least I'll train you a little bit by sparring with you, as I don't really see how much stronger I can get besides unlocking and causing my quirk to evolve even further. But anyway, goodbye, Bakugo," Izuku would say, as the class would then orchestrate some type of meetup at a mall. Since they all live in the same dorm rooms, they would all meet up at a mall or just shopping for all of the things Nezu had given them, such as just 7 pairs of clothes, and that's about it. As they would all do that, would then walk back as the entire night would go out with no problems at all. As we now see Izuku training for the next week, as he didn't want to just be left behind in his training, in case other people are intensely training and he could possibly be left behind if he didn't train for a week. Izuku knew this probably wasn't possible, however he still didn't want any chance of it happening. "Shigaraki, you know that Izuku kid you were talking about? The one you saw at the USJ that was able to defeat the Nomu?" "Oh, yes, All for One. What is it about with him?" You said he had some sort of quirk that allowed him to turn into different types of animals, yes? Yeah, he turned into a gorilla, a bird, I think, and then a dragon? The dragon one was the one that managed to defeat the Nomu. All for one starts to think, if I were to get that boy's quirk, I could become unstoppable. Shigaraki, go get me Dabi, please, real quick, All for One would say, as Shigaraki would then his head towards All for One. As Shigaraki would then rush over towards the just basic hideout, as he would then go and find Dabi. Once he would get him, he would tell Dabi that All for One wants to speak to him before guiding Dabi to All for One's room. Dabi, you are one of the smartest ones in this league, so I'm tasking you with this mission. I want you to make a plan, as there's going to be a summer training camp up in the mountains in just about a week. Now, I want you to make a plan to get Izuku Midoriya's quirk, or just get him here and I'll take the quirk, of course. So, you must come up with a plan. I presume he's kind-hearted, so say if you were to capture 2 of his friends, he might offer up himself. You just gotta make sure the scenario and situation plays right into your hand. Got it? All for One would say. Dabi would look on towards All for One before nodding his head. Alright, I got you, Dabi would say before going off to make his plan. A week now passes as we see Izuku leaning his head up against a bus window as it just bounces up and down, as finally the bus comes to a screeching halt on the side of the mountain, as there on the side of the mountain was the Wild Wild Pussycats, as they would look at Izuku and the rest of his class before telling him that they now have to make their way to the training camp while defeating different types of obstacles. Izuku would look at them, foreseeing the ground was about to start crumbling, as you would feel it within his feet. As the ground crumbles down beneath them, Izuku waits to see the bus drive off, as Izuku would then transform into a dragon. However, when he would try to communicate, all that came out was roars, as Izuku would only sigh before transforming back into a human. Alright, once I transform into a dragon, everyone get onto my back, Izuku would say. Everyone would nod their heads as Izuku would transform into his biggest dragon he could remember, as everyone would get onto Izuku's back. Izuku would then lift up into the air as he would and then end up flying away. One of the students would end up looking down for casually saying, "Hey, Izuku, it looks like you forgot Moneta." Oh well, I guess. Take too much energy for me to go back down there. So we cut to see Moneta rushing over trying to get the attention of Izuku. Izuku, wait! Come back for me! Izuku's, of course, words didn't really make sense to them, but they just assumed he said, oh, who cares? As Izuku would be flying, he would end up making his way over to where the bus was, taking a quick detour, as he would then land on the bus, grabbing it in his claws, before flying off towards the summer training camp, landing down, as the heroes would then just be shocked. No student had ever managed to do the summer training camp test so quickly, yet Izuku had done it while also getting them there within 10 minutes, while also saving his classmates from having to do all the work too. He's quite the smart one, isn't he, Izawa? Yes, he's a prodigy, pretty much. He has a hyper-intelligence quirk, and he can also turn into animals, as you can see with the dragon thing. And plus, he is Nezu's son, and I've trained him since he was like 10 or so. Oh, that explains why he's so resourceful, I guess, they would say, as Izawa would only nod his head in agreement. As they would then start to train the students since they had gotten there before they had thought, so they would just begin with another pre-warm-up to when the actual hell does begin. So, as all of the students would be stretching, they would then begin with a huge run down the mountain and then a sprint up the mountain. As all of the students would be begging not to do this, they were forced to, and they could use their quirks, however. So Izuku would transform into a bird, flying all the way up with complete ease. As the hero who was doing this, watching Izuku do this was just like, why can't you guys be like him? He was able to pass us with no problem. This route should take us just over an hour, and he made it up there within 10 minutes. You guys should be ashamed of yourselves. He's in your class, why can't you be like him? Would say, however, this teacher was only doing that to try and motivate the students, which clearly wasn't really going as planned. A week of this training hell with all of them would end up passing, with Izuku mostly just being there to help spar with the students, as Izuku had proved how strong and intelligent he was, so they really just thought if he was going to be training here, it really wouldn't do anything to him, so we might as well just have him train other students. So Izuku would end up just taking the students down, while some of them would be training their quirks. Izuku would be training them in fighting skills that he had learned from Aizawa, mastering them after the many years he'd been learning under Aizawa. So with that, the week would pass, as they would then be given the day to go outside, play, sit in the hot springs, do all of that sort of thing. And Class 1B, being there as well, would come up with the great idea of doing a hide-and-seek scare type thing, and they'll be the seekers while Class 1A will be the hiders. As they would all rush out, Izuku would choose to stay behind, deeming as it really wasn't worth his time to play a hide-and-seek game. Yes, it would be enjoyable, but he could do better things, like training, of course, to hopefully try to get stronger. As Izuku would go inside to start training while also helping some of the students learn, since he was also the teacher who would be helping the summer school kids that were inside instead of training, Izuku would end up helping by teaching them just some other types of things. After a while, Izuku would go outside to take a break, however, it was already nighttime, and Izuku would get a strong scent of a burning wood. Izuku would end up just being confused. Before looking up, he would see a massive cloud of smoke. He would say, Aizawa, do you happen to be burning anything just about a mile or so that way? Aizawa would look at Izuku funny before shaking his head. Izuku would transform into a tiny bird flying up into the air before looking down onto the trees. He would see a massive blue fire was spreading rapidly through the forest. It was like a massive tsunami of fire, taking trees one by one as it continues to move closer and closer towards Izuku. Izuku would look over towards the teachers before yelling that they need to get all of the students back towards the main training camp, as there was a fire, and it doesn't look like real, just naturally caused one. This looks like a villain fire, Izuku would say. As Izuku would end up remembering something, Kota, one of the hero's nephews, he was here too. But where was he? Izuku would look over towards one of them before asking where Kota was, as she would then say, he has a hiding spot over on the cliff edge. Please, try to save him, she would say desperately on towards Izuku, as Izuku would nod his head, flying off, rushing off towards wherever Kota, this kid, happened to be. As Izuku would flying off, he would search for this cliff edge before finding it. However, he was too far away to end up making it there, as this massive villain with tons of just muscle surrounding him that looked like kind of like raw flesh was approaching him fast. As Izuku would end up transforming into a cheetah, rushing as fast as he could, he would end up jumping right at Muscular, transforming right into a dragon, slamming his body right into Muscular at such a high velocity and speed that it causes Muscular's entire direction to shift right off of the mountain, sending him exploding the other way, before he would end up landing right into a pile of trees. As Izuku would end up putting out his hand towards Kota after transforming into a regular human, he would toss Kota into the air before transforming into a Pegasus, flying off towards wherever the heroes were. As he would end up landing, he would see that Magni and Spinner had started to surround them. As Izuku would see this, jump in the way after dropping Koda off, punching Magni right across the face. A Spinner would go to try to get an attack in on Izuku's back. However, he would flip over Spinner, grabbing Spinner's neck, putting him to a headlock, or he would end up knocking him out with a quick just slash to the neck. As both of them would lay there, Izuku would tie them up, looking over towards Aizawa. "Did you happen to find any students?" he would ask. Aizawa would shake his head as Izuku would then rush into the forest, where he would end up searching far and wide before he would end up spotting Tsuyu Asui and Unchaku Uraraka. However, all of a sudden he would start to hear giggles from around the corner, as Izuku would create his hand a wing, slashing with such a high speed that the wind pressure sliced right through a tree, where there stood a blonde-haired girl staring at them, holding a knife, as she would then rush on towards them, continually laughing. As Izuku would see this, the girl would slash on towards him. However, Izuku would grab the blade, causing his hand to start bleeding. However, he would twist the blade back till it was pointing right at her neck. As she would be seeing this, she would start to struggle as Izuku continued to push on forward. However, before the knife could even cut her, Izuku would have Tsuyuasui come up behind her and then end up just using her tongue to grab her around the neck, slamming her right into a tree. As Izuku would end up saying, "Alright guys, I'm gonna go look for more students. The training camp's back that way," he would say, pointing there before rushing off, as both of them would nod their heads, tying up Toga or carrying her over towards the summer training camp, just the main building, that is. As Izuku would be rushing around, all of a sudden he would come to a stop, as there he stood face to face with Dabi, along with Bakugo and Todoroki. As Izuku would be staring face to face with Dabi, all of a sudden teeth-looking things were very jagged would come out of nowhere, spewing right down at Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, trying to hit them. However, Izuku would jump out of the way, and so would Bakugo and Todoroki. However, they happened to jump just a little too high, as there came Mr. compressing both Bakugo and Todoroki into the palm of his hand into tiny little marbles. Izuku would see this as Mr. Compress would then toss both of the marbles down to Dabi. As he would end up catching them, Dabi would look down right at them. "Alright, let's go then," he would say, snapping his fingers, about to go right into a portal. However, Izuku would yell, "Wait," for Dabi. Dabi would smile, knowing Izuku would fall right into his trap. "If you release both of them, I'll go with you," Izuku would say. "Oh, really?" "Fine then," Dabi would say, as he would then toss the marbles back over towards Izuku. Izuku would thinking he had won. However, all of the sudden, out of nowhere, Kaminari came in, about to electrocute Dabi. As Izuku was going to punch Dabi, he would grab Kaminari's neck within an instant. Not so fast. If you happen to take another step towards me and not into that portal, your friend here is gonna be toast," Dabi would say. Izuku would sigh, face-palming, knowing that Kaminari just had to ruin his chances of being able to defeat and capture this villain. So Izuku would sigh before walking into the portal. "Hello, Izuku Midoriya." "Hello, All For One. I presume you've been expecting me," Izuku would say, as All For One would only laugh. "Why, yes, I have," he would say, sticking out his hand, going to reach down towards Izuku's head to presumably take his cork. However, Izuku didn't move, only smiling on towards the giant towering over him. This shocked All For One. Why wasn't Izuku moving backwards or recoiling? He knew Izuku knew about him, so he must have known about his cork, but yet, why would he just let this happen? Why would he just let him take his cork? Izuku, only smiling at All For One, would know All For One wasn't going to be able to take his cork. As something about Izuku's cork, it was just one of the very, very few rare corks that just couldn't be taken. It was as if Izuku had some sort of plot armor, that he was in some sort of show. So as All For One reached down, grabbing onto Izuku's head, trying to take his cork, nothing would happen. This shocked All For One even further, as he was confused that this has never happened to him before. He's never not been able to take someone's quirk, but yet here this anomaly was standing in front of him, and he just couldn't take his quirk. Izuku would start to laugh. You're a fool, All For One. And I'm about to make you do one even more, Izuku would say, snapping his fingers, turning himself into a phoenix. As all of the League of Villains would be thrown out of the bar that they were standing in, farther away from where Izuku was and All For One was. As Izuku would then open up his wings, as a massive ball of flames would consume both All For One and Izuku, creating a dome around them. You're not going to be able to leave this place, All For One. You're stuck here until you or I end up dying, Izuku would say, as All For One would only stare at him before cracking his fists. Bring it on, then. You're only a mere child. I've been doing stuff like this for over 200 years. So why don't you show me what you've got, All For One would say, bringing out his fist, telling Izuku to come towards him. As Izuku would do that, rushing towards All For One, his phoenix form, transforming back into it, going towards All For One, who would slash upwards with his wing, causing flames to spread out, consuming All For One further, melting the helmet around him, as the burning and melting metal would start to fuse with All For One's skin, as he would start to scream in agony from how hot the blistering metal was. However, he wouldn't let this spite him, as his healing work would slowly overcome as the metal would fuse into his body and skin. However, the pain had subsided due to his pain nullification quirk. Now he would stare down at Izuku, or smiling. That's enough messing around. I've already been permanently scarred by you now, so why don't I go ahead and end this before anything else happens to me, he would say, rushing towards Izuku, using one of his massive quirks that allows him to manipulate the ground, putting his hand down as spikes would protrude out, launching their way towards Izuku. However, Izuku would only fly up, dodging the spikes, before slashing with his wing, causing all of the spikes to split into 1,000 of tiny little cubes. So All For One would stare on at Izuku's power, not amused. I'd have to admit, Izuku, although you are young, you have one of the most strongest powers I've ever seen. It's quite interesting. But who cares now? It's not gonna last for too much longer, All For One would say, as Izuku would only laugh. Sure, All For One, sure, Izuku says, as All For One would rush over towards Izuku, punching him right across the face. However, nothing would end up happening. Izuku would look over towards All For One, who could strangely understand Izuku, even though he was in his phoenix form. It was basically just squawking like a bird. As All For One rushing towards Izuku would continue punching him, however, nothing seemed to happen, as Izuku would then transform into a dragon, rushing on towards just the beast of a person. Izuku would bite All For One right in the chest before lifting him up, throwing him up with his jaws, opening his jaws wide as All For One would fall right through. Izuku would then eat All For One. As All For One would fall down into Izuku's stomach, yelling that this wasn't going to be the last of him. However, the stomach acids within Izuku had already started melting All For One, destroying him inside of Izuku. As the flame barrier would then subside, as Izuku would then smile. Well, that's enough of that, I guess, he would say, as a news helicopter would then appear out of nowhere as if it had been there the entire time, staring down with a flash, a spotlight at Izuku. Would look down at Izuku through all of the rubble, wondering why was a kid just standing there in the rubble. Izuku would stare up to the helicopter before waving on national news, as Izuku's entire class was surrounded by the TV, staring on at the TV. Wait, is that Izuku? Why is he there? Was he the one that created that massive bubble thing? Many of them would end up just saying, yeah, he must have. I mean, why else would he be in the direct middle of it? So anyway, Izuku would walk over back to the UA campus before walking into the dorms, where Nezu, Aizawa, and All Might would be sitting there waiting for him with their hands crossed. Izuku, do you mind telling me what happened?" Nezu would say in a striking voice. However, Izuku would only laugh. "Well, I made sure it was self-defense. All for One did place his hands on me, so I just decided to eat him, you know. It was in self-defense, after all, and I didn't want him to kill anybody else. Simple as that," Izuku would say, nodding his head. All Might would just sigh before looking at Izuku. "So you're telling me you managed to defeat the strongest supervillain this world has ever seen?" "Yup," Izuku would say, giving a simple but straightforward answer. All Might would then start laughing. "Well, I guess you are quite the strong one. You did manage to defeat me at full power, after all." "No, well, I guess." Izuku only start laughing even more. "Yeah, I guess I'm already destined to become number one. Not sure, though, what Bakugo thinks that he's gonna beat me. Maybe I'll go easy on him." Bakugo would be walking around the corner after hearing that Izuku would go easy on him, as he would then rush towards Izuku with an explosion in hand. "What the hell did you say about me, Deku?" he would say. However, Isawa would then use his just scarf to capture Bakugo before looking at him. Like, "Don't start this now, Bakugo." We now cut forward a month as we see Izuku standing in the quirk licensing exam hallway, as he had already completed this twice over, and he's already has a licensed quirk usage license, so he really doesn't have to take this, but he knows how much just pressure everyone puts on UA students, especially the Class 1A kids. So Izuku decided to go there to help his classmates out. And with the help of Izuku, mostly transforming into the two mythical beasts that he likes the most, being the dragon and the phoenix, Izuku would just allow for all of his classmates to easily pass the exam, capturing many students for the first part where they had to touch certain targets on someone. He would just use his phoenix and create a dome, making it so that no one was allowed to leave. He would then swoop in, knocking all of them out as his classmates would come in, easily taking them out, as they would see that Izuku was basically just overpowering everyone, and would just take him out from there to make things more fair. So, as all of that would happening, and Izuku passing along with the rest of his class, they would now all just be registered heroes now, as now with them being heroes, they could use their quirk out in public to do whatever they felt like it and whatever they wanted. Well, not exactly, but if they saw a villain, they can legally go and stop it by using their quirk. However, they're not registered heroes just yet. So, with that, now see Izuku walking into class, as Aizawa would then explain to all of the students that they are going to be participating in a work study. However, because of the recent villain attacks, this work study is going to be optional. And so, with the optional work study, you would just have an option to go and work with anybody they see do and wanted to do or work with to get more experience. And Izuku being Izuku and having the plot armor and anime logic that he has, Izuku will end up getting it he would be told that he has the opportunity to just be a work study by himself. He can just go off by himself and do whatever he wanted and just try to stop as many villains as possible. Izuku, of course, being Izuku, would agree to this, and so he would start to look through some of the criminal records, where he would end up finding someone by the name of Overhaul, and how he had apparently had been holding captive a young girl named Eri. As Izuku, seeing this, would end up just looking down at it and reading it in disgust. How could a grown man be keeping such a young girl, torturing her? It just didn't make any sense to him. And so Izuku would end up seeking out All For One, making his personal duty to go out and find All For One, making sure that All For One just cannot be living like such a monster that he is. And so when Izuku would be roaming the streets in his hero costume, which remember is basically just nothing, because if he were to transform into a beast, then it would just rip the costume. So Izuku has to wear something sort of like Mirio's costume that is made out of the fibers of his hair, so that when he transforms, it only expands or just disappears. It's just anime logic, we'll go with that. Doesn't really make sense, but at the same time, it's anime, so it kind of makes sense. So as Izuku was walking along a path, all of a sudden Eri would bump into him. Izuku looking down, and after all the research he had, he would end up recognizing who the young girl was. Wait a minute, you're... Before he could finish his sentence, Overhaul would turn the corner. Come on now, Eri. I'm sorry about that, sir. She didn't mean to. Hey, Eri, why don't you go ahead and say sorry to the man? She would shakily say, oh, I'm sorry. Shaking her hands just worriedly that Izuku was going to retaliate. However, Izuku could only smile down at her. Oh, it's okay. As Eri would only look at Izuku. What? She would say, confused, as Overhaul would tug on her hand, pulling her forward. Izuku, seeing this, liking this, would end up grabbing the back of Overhaul's neck before pulling him back. So, Overhaul, it appears we finally meet. So, I'll give you two options. I will leave with Eri, and you can go off scot-free, or you try to go off with Eri, and I'll kill you, Izuku would say. Overhaul would try to touch Izuku, however he would transform into a lizard, now crawling up Overhaul's leg. As Overhaul would feel this, he would go down to reach towards Izuku, however Izuku would jump off, transforming into a phoenix, slashing his wing towards Overhaul as fire would spread all throughout Overhaul's body as he would start to yell out in pain. As Izuku would then punch Overhaul right across the face, now as a normal person, as Overhaul would now fall down to the ground. Izuku, transforming into a smaller version of a dragon, would then eat Overhaul right in front of Eri. However, Eri didn't really care, as just seeing her captor and torturer be killed, she just couldn't care less. She was only happy that she was finally free of the curse that was Overhaul. As Izuku would take her back to UA and would end up showing her to Nezu, so Nezu would end up realizing that Izuku had saved one of the girls that Night Eye had been trying to find. So Nezu would call up Night Eye, who would then just so you managed to kill Overhaul. I'm not too happy you killed him, but at least he's now gone from this dreaded planet. Just Night Eye would say. And that is where this what if comes to an end. Izuku would seek out the rest of the League of Villains, capturing them or eating them like he did to All for One and Overhaul. However, Izuku would end up fulfilling his legacy and becoming the #1 hero. And that is where this movie comes to an end. I hope you all did enjoy this series, What If Deku Was the Son of Nezu? And if you did, please consider subscribing, as it really does help this channel out, and you can even be notified when the other parts of the series do end up coming out. Once again, I thank you all for watching, once again, and goodbye.